Hello, you are now entering the infinite void. Hang on tight. We cannot save you now.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your co-host Jacob.
And I'm your co-host Matty, and today's episode is part one of our new series, What is Free Will?, where we'll be discussing arguments for free will. So just to sort of introduce the series, we're planning to do an episode today about what arguments there are for free will. We'll follow it next time with arguments against free will, and then the third part will be a sort of conclusion, summary, and I guess our thoughts as well will be in there. So shall we kick off with... I see you've got some notes about what free will is.
I'm excited for this one. We've kind of mentioned it before quite a lot, and I feel like it'll be good to kind of finally jump in and talk about it. I'm going to try and stay partial until the final episode. However, people that watch this podcast must have an idea of where we fall, or if they follow us on Twitter, they must have an idea where we fall based off the kind of stuff that we say. But so for anyone that doesn't know what free will is, but you've somehow managed to discover this podcast episode or video on whatever platform you are watching it on, free will is the capacity of agents to choose between different possible courses of actions. So free will is closely linked to the concepts of moral responsibility, praise, guilt, sin, and other judgments which apply only to actions that are freely chosen. It is also connected with the concepts of advice, persuasion, and deliberation. Traditionally, only actions that are freely willed are seen as deserving credit or blame. Whether free will exists, what it is, and the implications of whether it exists are some of the longest running debates of philosophy and religion. So yeah, it's an interesting one because off the base of it, if you were to sit here now and think about it, you would probably say, yes, I am in control of my own will. I am in control of my thoughts. I'm in control of my actions. I'm in control of the person that I am. Because I think most people, without putting thought, and I don't want to sound condescending when I say that, because I don't mean like without putting thought as in like you've not thought about it. I just mean if you really start kind of breaking it down from all of the different actions, and that's what we'll see in part two of why free will might not exist. There's loads of options like determinism or I don't know, outcomes from situations that have happened that have led to other things, which I know is kind of like determinism, but all these things that kind of like feed into you and kind of create an outcome. So it's an interesting one because I think off base value, most people probably do believe that they have free will. But then on the flip side of it, they probably also agree that actions are deterministic. Do you know what I mean? I feel like most people would agree with both of those statements. But when it comes down to this argument, it gets quite tricky and in gray area because if you really want to like come down to it, your consciousness or whatever it is kind of located or comes from the brain, and the brain is a biological thing, and biological things means it exists in the physical universe, and in physical universe everything's determined to some aspect. So then it would mean that it's determined on some layer. So it's an interesting one. What are your kind of thoughts on free will? Because it's weird, isn't it? Because you do feel free when you
it is an odd one, and I was interested. To be quite honest, I hadn't looked at your notes before this, but I was interested to see that you'd sort of picked up on this idea of it being closely connected with sort of like credit and blame.
Yeah,
because a lot of, and I'll come back to this. It's like sort of one. It's not really an argument for I get it, but it ties into this quite nicely. Is that, you know, if you take something like our legal system, that is entirely built around the principle that people are to blame for their actions. You know, so someone that has shot someone, it ultimately comes down to a question. You know, it's irrefutable they have shot this person. It comes down to a question of, did they choose to do it? Were they consciously aware and, they did it of their own free will, or were they coerced, or were they not in the right state of mind, or another question. It's literally a question of, did they do it of their own free will? And, we're having this debate of, is free will even real? So it is quite interesting. This sort of playoff between, as you said, an idea of a physical universe, and we know that things follow laws of physics, versus something that's quite abstract, and it does closely connect to things like consciousness. These ideas, but it just feels like there is something about humans and perhaps other, life forms and animals that is conscious and free and does something other than, it's an idea of like a soul, that there is something other than just the laws of physics that just tell us what to do.
No, I agree. And I was watching a really good video today, actually, because I've been watching a lot of stuff really on libertarianism versus determinism, because I didn't even realize that there's kind of like different versions of libertarianism too, isn't there? Like you've got libertarianism in like a political standpoint, and then you've got libertarianism in kind of like a philosophical standpoint. And they're both kind of arguing for like freedom, but one's arguing that like free will exists, and then the other one's arguing free from government, say, I guess. But I've been looking a lot into that, and I kept hearing this story, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, so apologies, but I want to call it Opides story. Okay, so the general gist of the story goes is that there is a prophecy. This couple are about to have a baby. It's called Opides. Sorry if I'm getting it wrong. And there's a prophecy told to them that Opides is going to be born. He's going to kill his father, and he's going to marry his mum. And his mum and dad... Oedipus. Okay. Yes, here we go. So Oedipus, and then Oedipus, his dad goes, well, I'm not going to mess around with this, so I'm going to put Oedipus in the forest and just leave him to kind of die. So he does that, and then another family finds Oedipus, raises him, tells him about this legend or myth or prophecy that's going to happen, and he decides, because I don't know that you guys are not my real parents, I'm going to leave because I don't want to kill you, Dad, and marry you, Mum. And he leaves. And on his journey, he gets into a fight with a human and has to fight him for his life. And it ends up being his real dad. And he goes on to marry that man's wife, which ends up being his real mum. And he has no idea about it. And it's this kind of idea that Opides had free will and made that decision to like leave his parents, who he thought were his real parents, to not make that decision. But it comes on to like this deterministic idea that everything was going to happen the way that it was going to happen, and even though he made that choice, it still fell on it. And I thought that was quite a good way of explaining it. But free will is a difficult one for me, because for the longest of time, before I'd really thought about it or looked into it, I did genuinely believe in it. And I'm not saying that I don't now, but for me it was kind of just like 100% no-brainer argument, because I'm conscious of myself. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not sure if that is just growing up and having maybe like religious aspects within like how the way that I was brought up or whatever it was. But it's interesting, because I can sit there and, like I was saying earlier, I can sit there and really say that I do feel that I have free will. But at the same time, I can sit there and listen to science and go, oh, well, if that's how we think consciousness works, or if that's how we think this works within reality, then maybe it makes sense that it doesn't go that way. But they're both conflicting to like be with each other. Do you know what I mean? And that's my biggest struggle. It's like, okay, either or, it still feels real.
Yeah, this I guess I'll go with at this point. I'll bring in I think my main argument before that I sort of came across was that there's there's a real question of, what are we trying to get out of this argument? And I sort of see people compare it to other concepts of, knowledge or ignorance. It's a very human thing, isn't it? Free will. Like what we're trying to define here is quite sort of personal and human. And whether something is, we can talk about this sort of like determinism, there's, just the universe playing out and we just sort of go along with it. But what would free will actually look like? Because this is always the sort of debate, is that, say, okay, you and me have decided to come on this call, and immediately you say, why did you say, well, I choose to do that. That's free will. And then someone would come back, well, no, it's all deterministic. The only reason why you did that was because you can either go down the route of, individual electrons in your brain, like telling you what to do, or, physical things that we have done, like where we went to school and where we grew up, and that led to our interests, which means that we sort of came together and decided to do the show, etc. Like you can go all ways about it, but and people say that means there is no free will, that we're just sort of, it's deterministic. But if you were to compare that to, what would free will actually look like? Just say that free will was actually real and that wasn't deterministic. What would it actually look like to someone performing free will? Well, it would look like, me choosing to come and do this thing. And if, I wanted to, I could just get up and walk away like I could do now. That's what it would look like. So there's this argument of, we can talk about, at a molecular level, we're doing something, or there's some like grand scheme of the universe and we're all just going along with it. But, to me, it feels real. And ultimately, that's all that really matters, isn't it? If there was an illusion of free will, whether it's real or not in the background doesn't really matter. It's, as I said, similar to other concepts of ignorance and knowledge. It's sort of this thing of like, if you could do anything if you put your mind to it, and not getting into like politics and stuff like that. But, if you truly believe that you could do something, you can go and do it. And if you truly believe that you were clever or beautiful or any of these things, like you could just believe that and go along with it. Like there's nothing to stop you, is there? So
Yeah.
it's a similar sort of argument to those other ideas. Is that it's a very human thing. It's very personal, and ultimately, if you think there's free will, then that might just be good enough, and that might be what free will is. And there maybe isn't even a way to properly assess it and sort of rule out free will being real or not. So that was sort of one argument I came across that I thought quite interesting. So
Yeah, no, I can see that side of it. One thing that I wanted to mention to you, because I thought it was quite a good thought experiment, and it was this idea that I can't remember the case, but basically it was this guy that got arrested for something to do with pedophilia, but then it was a big story, if you remember, and they found that he actually had a brain tumor, and it developed in the part of his brain that was like pushing against something, and they'd proven that he developed this like sexual urge for pedophilia through the brain tumor, and that when they removed the brain tumor, he lost the urge, and then when it grew back, he got it back. And I thought that was interesting, because to anyone that wouldn't believe in free will, the first thing that they would say would be like, ha, there's your proof. Something physical has just kind of, sorry if I'm moving around on the video, my headphone on the right side keeps like popping off a little bit. But to anyone that like didn't believe in free will, they'd be like, ha, there's your proof. Something physical has affected his brain and changed like what he's wanted. But this video that I was watching, they were kind of like breaking it down and talking about how it still can also be viewed though as free will. Because it's like you're saying, it all comes down to circumstances and how people are explaining they feel in the moment. And I feel like this is the biggest catch-22 of it, because you could probably go the other way too, couldn't you? Like, there are probably a lot of people on planet Earth. I am one of them for the longest of time, because, you know, us millennials, we grew up in oversaturated culture of just like finding purpose and like what I wanted to do with my life. And like, if you could make, if you found out at the end of it that like it didn't exist and like it was all predetermined anyway, you'd be like, wow, I wasted a lot of time trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I was always going to do that. You know what I mean? But on the flip side of it too, I feel like free will, like we're saying, it feels like it's there, and it's also very human, isn't it? It gives you purpose. It's like a flip of a coin. Like, you have purpose on one side, and then you have like free will on the other to create that purpose and to create that opportunity and your social circle and everything you're going to do, because it is a bleak will to consider, like, the things that you're going to be good at are going to be the things that you're going to be good at. And you're only ever going to know those things because your subconscious has decided that you're only ever going to try those things. And you might feel like you're going to be spontaneous today and try something new, but it was always decided that you were going to be boring and that one day you were going to be spontaneous. So,
yeah, it's interesting you said about like social circles and stuff, because there is like an aspect of this of, I think when people think about, it's again of like, what do people think free will would look like? Because I think your immediate sort of reaction is that, okay, someone would just do something completely off the rails and completely ridiculous without any reason, and that they would be able to do that under free will. Like, I think that's what people are sort of imagining, but like, do we really need that for someone to have free will? Because like, as we go through our lives, like, you know, we pick up friends and, you know, things happen. There's always going to be, you know, I could be going completely the wrong way with this, but if I'm arguing for free will, it's not that I am completely immune from any sort of outside influence. It's not that I am just a single person that just behaves erratically all of the time, doing exactly what I want to do. You know, there is, and it links to what you said about his guy with the brain tumor. I hadn't sort of heard that story, but when he said it, my first reaction was not that it was, oh, we've got him now, there's definitely no free will. It was like, well, no, what you're saying now is that someone might have had free will. That's another debate. And then an external factor's taken away that free will, or whatever free will they had. You know, this guy was normal, and then some factor has taken away his ability to make those decisions. You know, and bring it back to the law. It's the same way that, you know, I'm free to go outside and do what I want. If I got locked up, I wouldn't be. Like, it's that simple, isn't it? You know. So I think that this argument of, people tend to think of free will as like, you could just do whatever you wanted, and I don't think that's really helpful or what free will should be construed as. Like, it's more about making choice, and you know, your choice is ultimately always going to be impacted by, you know, other people and other factors. But it's like the freedom to arrive at the choice that you have decided and feel like you've made that choice. Whether you've actually, because if someone said to me, like, you know, let's say when you're starting a new job or you're choosing a new job, you would like to think, oh yeah, I made this choice. Like, I'm doing this job because I wanted. I applied for it. I chose to do this job. There's also, you know, even if you believe in free will, there's always going to be factors. You know, the money, the location, etc. Like, there's always going to be factors, and all of those things could mean that there was really only ever one choice to make. You know, if you say, okay, I need to get a new job, there's 10 different jobs on the market, and I want it to pay this much, be in this location, and have these perks, something like that, then it might just be that there's only one job that really fits that. And you can still choose to apply for it, in the same way that you could say, oh, okay, I'm not going to care how much it pays and I'm going to go for another job. You could do that. But ultimately, like, if you have a set of criteria which you have chosen and something meets those criteria, you choosing to do that or you choosing to make that choice is still sort of free, even though you've been very heavily influenced and guided. Like,
yeah, totally. I was thinking about this because it would be like getting up today and going, all right, for dinner I'm gonna have mashed potato. I just feel like I randomly made that up in my head. Okay, haha, there's my free will. I'm having mashed potato, right? But there's there's loads of influences and reasons on why I could have chose mashed potato right now. Do you know what I mean? I could have had a dental problem, right? For the last couple of days, my tooth could have been hurting, and I could have subconsciously gone, I need to have something soft for my mouth because I don't want to wreck my tooth. Or I could have seen something on TV today of an advert of mashed potato on a Sunday roast dinner or something like that. Do you know what I mean? And there's all of those things that kind of come into it too. But one thing I do want to say quickly onto what you were just saying a second ago is like, it is also multi-layered. Do you know what I mean? Because like when you were saying like, what does it mean for someone to look like they've got free will? Well, you've got loads of people that say that free will is real, right? You've got loads of people that would have free will, but are choosing to follow rules. And that's their free will choosing that outcome for them. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're free, they're deciding to follow rules because everybody else is following rules. So like, you can make the argument for both sides of what you're saying there, where like, okay, somebody might be erratic, somebody might be doing random things all the time and it be complete chaos because they're trying to show how much free will they've got. But you could also be super orderly and fall in line and be informed to everything else with free will because you've made that decision because you think your free will has decided that's how I want to act and behave.
Yeah.
Because behavior is another huge one, isn't it? Because it's like how you decide to act, talk, and be, what you embody is kind of like this character that you've decided for yourself. Like, you know, deep down what you like, what you don't like, but not saying that it's drastically different, but there's a bit more give and take for the surface version of you. Like, if you hate something, but someone you like is showing you that, you're more likely to be a little bit more lenient because you understand and respect that person, or vice versa. Do you know what I mean? So in regards to that, you're kind of deciding every day what your character is going to be in this kind of like universe. And I think that's also kind of why there's this argument for free will, because it really does feel like you're deciding who you are, external to being influenced. Because I think whilst there is a lot of data to kind of show that influence plays a huge factor in like character building and people building and self-awareness and all of that, there is also a bit of a weird element sometimes where like you can have people that grow up in communities that are just completely different to everyone else and they've had the exact same circumstances, or a child that's grown up in, I don't know, a super religious family and now isn't.
I think, I guess just to sort of like summarize this a little bit, is that when discussing free will, I think a lot of people have this idea of when they're arguing against free will, what they're really arguing against is someone being completely independent and being completely removed from everything. When actually, a lot, it is true that some people will go completely away from the norm, but ultimately, if you take a sample size of 8 billion people, some people are going to do that, and but a lot of people are going to be influenced by their surroundings. And I think just to say, oh, look, they're being influenced by people, there's no free will, I think is quite a naive argument. And that's sort of the main argument for free will, is that a lot of people maybe aren't really arguing against free will, they're arguing against like complete independence from stuff. So yeah.
No, that's fair. one thing I definitely wanted to include in this little bit was a little bit on libertarianism, because I felt it was probably quite important to the argument for free will. So for anyone that doesn't know what that is, the libertarian argues that free will is real and non-deterministic, that at least some humans' choices could have occurred otherwise than they did, given that exact same causes. Common arguments for libertarian free will include our feeling of freedom, which is kind of like what we've been talking about, and another thing that we mentioned towards the start, which is this need for a moral responsibility, because there's also this idea of like, you know, when you do something and you do like that whole moral idea of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or oh, I should apologize, or what, maybe my actions weren't correct. Like that ability to assess what you've done kind of also is a bit of a good argument for free will, because it allows you to kind of assess and kind of go, this is how I should behave going forward. And most people, if they're not stuck in their ways, can change that and behave differently going forward. So that is an interesting thing. And then obviously the final little bit, which is the indeterminist nature of quantum physics, which I think you want to talk about a little bit more for the argument against free will in next week's episode. So we'll leave that one out for a little bit. But I kind of wanted to include that in there because I felt like that's probably one of the main arguments for free will. But it is interesting because it has a lot of religious ties too as well, doesn't it? Free will, and this idea that like God or a creator gave you free will to create, so you could go through your life and your actions would determine whether or not you would end up in heaven or hell. I'm sorry if I butchered that for anyone that is religious, but yeah, that's interesting within itself, because for me, I just feel like either we've over complicated everything because we're humans. Do you know what I mean? Like I can't remember who said it, but we mentioned it in like 2 weeks ago in an episode or something, because we were talking about free will. Actually, I think this is why we ended up doing this series. But it was this idea of like, maybe a rock is just a rock. Do you know what I mean? Like, why do we have to have like 40 different? I know there's not. Well, there might be 40 different names for rocks, but I don't think there is. I think there's 3, isn't there? From what I learned in science, or is there more than 3? I know I'm going to be attacked by rock people online. I don't know how many rocks exist, but however many there are, it's that idea, isn't there, that of like, could just be rocks. And maybe it's the same with consciousness. Like maybe consciousness doesn't even exist. Maybe just like it's just taking in data, like we talked about in our AI series, do you know what I mean, and our simulation theory series, because free will plays kind of a big part in both of those ones in a way. Do you know what I mean? Because like artificial intelligence, how would you code free will into something? And then like, I know me and you both weren't sure how we felt about the whole simulation idea, and because I think we fell on the conclusion that you can't prove it's a simulation, so it doesn't matter right now, isn't it, or something. I think that's kind of where we felt.
Something like that.
And but like even that kind of thing is very similar. Like if it is a simulation, then free will is an interesting one, because does everything have free will, or is some things NPCs? Are we just background for some certain things that have free will? Are we top of the food chain? As like you were saying before, like it looks like humans have free will on the planet, but like my cat also sometimes looks like she has free will. I can tell her, please stop messing with the Christmas tree, and she will decide, no, I'm going to mess with the Christmas tree. But then in other times, she's a complete slave to like her biology, and she'll do things in a certain way constantly because she's a cat. So it's an interesting one for me, because I really do like want to believe in free will, and I feel like I have free will, but from this research, and I feel like as we kind of go on throughout the series and talk about it a little bit more, there seems to be a lot more arguments for against free will.
I agree. The one I know we mentioned it just before we started recording was this quantum thing.
Yeah.
Like, now's probably a good time to discuss it. Did you want? I guess I'll start. So it was something that I was going to talk about next week, as being against free will, against free will. But it can also be taken, I think, for free will. So this idea of ultimately everything being sort of quantum in nature, and we've discussed loads on the podcast about things being probabilistic and wave functions collapsing.
Yeah.
Um, Fundamentally, these wave functions collapse when there's an observer. So is that a sort of free will? Is that if everything is ultimately made of quantum stuff and this is wave functions, just us being a thing observing it, we sort of impart some action onto what's happening around us, and whether we're sort of free to do that, I don't know. But there's some choice being made, and we are having a consequence on the universe and sort of impacting it.
That's heady. No, I haven't thought about it like that. That is a good point.
Yeah, because I'll go into it more next week. But if you could just take the view of, it's all probabilistic in the same way that things are deterministic, things just happen, but rather than just happening deterministically, they happen probabilistically in some random sort of way. But you could also take a view of it as like, it might be all random, but if we're the ones throwing the dice, are we not having some role in what we're doing? Like, it would be, I think that's sort of the best way to describe it, is that there is some probabilistic randomness in it, but we're still having some impact, aren't we? We're still having some not say, but there's some consequences of what we're doing and us being here.
Yeah. Well, it was like you said at the beginning of the episode, which has really sat with me in the back of my brain as we've kind of spoken through all this episode. And that is this idea that, like, it seems like science is saying that free will isn't a thing, but why do we live in such a world that's built on it being a thing? Like you were saying with like how the system works with you being prosecuted for doing things, like all of that, it's all done based off this idea that you have free will. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like on face value, you could just make the argument it's outdated. When those things were made, we all thought that free will existed, and it might exist. But don't you think that's crazy?
Yeah. It does seem a bit weird that like we're going to set up our entire. It goes back to what I was saying about it. Maybe it just needs to be some human construct, and it works for us because we set up all these systems that rely on it. Whether it's real or not doesn't really matter, does it? So
no, maybe it's. Yeah, I was describing it like this, okay? So I'm sorry if this sounds completely way off, but I thought this was quite a good way of explaining it, right? It's like what I was saying to my partner about mood rings, right?
Yeah.
Because mood rings, there's a slight practicality to them, right? What they should call them is like your skin, like surface temperature ring is what it should be called, right? And when it goes to red, your skin surface temperature is this color, or the room temperature is this color. And when it goes to this color, it could be that. Like, there's a practicality for it, but it's got the wrong name with it being called a mood ring. And maybe that's maybe that's what's happened here with free will. Maybe. And this, by the way, I'm not claiming that I've just solved a problem that is thousands of years in the making. I'm just saying, like, maybe that's what it is. Maybe free will is kind of like I'm trying to think of the right word here, but like unaware self of like just our moral compass. We're giving it free will because that kind of tricks us into thinking like we have control over it, or it tricks us all into thinking we're good people because ultimately it's down to you, when really it's just more of like a moral compass issue. Because I'm sure we'll get into it next week, but it's like what Sam Harris was saying, wasn't it, about this idea that like there are things going on around you all the time, like waveforms and different
Mhm.
energies and all this kind of stuff moving, like not even like being like sounding like a mystic now. I'm just like being normal, like cosmic radiation, ultraviolet radiation, infrared, light, just electromagnetic frequencies, all of that stuff constantly going through and around you. And that's obviously in a deterministic way
Yeah.
having an action on you, whether or
Mhm.
not it's good or bad or changes the way that you think. But
Mhm.
I think that's kind of where the argument goes, doesn't it, really? Because the argument against free will is really deterministic, isn't it?
Mhm.
And there's a few
Yeah.
others, but I'm sure we'll talk about that for part 2.
Mhm.
But yeah, have you got any final bits you want to finish on for this? Or I think we've pretty much covered everything, because there's not much, if I'm going to be honest with you, that kind of covers on the argument for free will.
Yeah.
I was surprised.
You very quickly get into religion and stuff, which is fine, but I just don't know enough to talk about in
Yeah.
any expertise. So.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. All right, then. Well, yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in to this week of The Infinite Void. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you're watching us. Hey, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts, make sure to hit that follow/subscribe button so you can stay up to date and be notified when new episodes come out. If you want to let us know down in the comment section below if anything that we've missed or anything that we should include in our part 2 for arguments against free will. We also dropped a new episode of This Week on Planet Earth on YouTube, so head over and watch that for some catch-up news segments, really, on everything that's happened in this week in the world of tech and science. And yeah, you can follow us on social media at Infinite Void Pod on both Twitter and Instagram. And we've also just recently launched we haven't just recently launched, but I recently updated our Patreon. So there's some new kind of little packages and tiers. So head over and check that out. And yeah, guys, we will catch you next episode for part 2. What is free will? Arguments against free will. Hey everyone, we wanted to take a moment to tell you about our brand new Patreon page.
Yeah, so we've devised a load of new goodies that are neatly packaged across 3 different tiers for you.
Tiers start at £3 and go all the way up to £10 a month.
Just to say, the Patreon is in no way an obligation, and we're going to continue making the podcast as it is freely available across all the platforms. But if you'd like to support us and show your support, you can now.
So yeah, head over to patreon.com/Infinite Void Pod for more information.